Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ashley Melepe with ADT Mag and Visual Studio Magazine, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for today's event titled Modern Open Source Risk Management, What You Should Be Doing Now, sponsored by Revenera. Before we get started, let me quickly go over a few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer them. Our sponsor, Revenera, has also provided some helpful resources for you. You'll find those on the right-hand side of your console under the Resources tab. Finally, today's webcast is also being recorded. For a link so you can rewatch the session or share it with a colleague. Our speakers for today, Dr. Andres Kotula and Venkat Ramdonga. Over to you, team.
Hello and good morning. My name is Andreas Kotula and welcome to the webinar about why open source matters right now. We'll have a short introduction, what open source is and why you should take a special view on it. Then we look in the regulatory landscape around the globe. We have one section about AI-generated code and some compliance examples where you should be very careful. And then we talk about modern open source risk management tools that you should be using and what kind of process methods you should look at. At the end, we have lots of room for questions and answers. And yeah, welcome to the webinar. And I'm happy that you're all here. The webinar today will be run by myself, Andreas Kotula. I'm the founder and CEO of Bitsy. We have been founded in 2008, and we have locations in Germany and one in the US and California. Our focus is code auditing. We check code, we test code, and we have a very high experience in managing open source code and to consult about the same. We have been an Open Chain member since many, many years, and we are a long-term partner from Revenera. I hopefully will also have Venkat with me in a minute. There are some problems with him dialing in, so I will guide you until he can join the webinar as well. Well, first of all, what we are seeing open source today is everywhere. So it's ubiquitous and it has become indispensable for modern software development. Nobody can build an application anymore efficiently without using open source. And that does not matter for the industry where you are in. It doesn't matter if you're automotive, healthcare, IoT, education, it doesn't matter what kind of development methods you use, if it's just traditional waterfall developments or if you deliver software as a service. Open source is everywhere. We see it especially in embedded products like embedded Linux or also the Android ecosystem. From the some talks to the industry that we have done, we know that 80 to 90% of each software application is now consisting of open source. Open source itself is maintained by communities, and these communities can either be individual contributors or it can be companies that have a business model around open source. So today we will be talking about how to manage these open source efficiently. So why does it even matter more than ever? Open source has been around since 20, 30 years, and we have seen a dramatic increase of the amount of open source that is available and also the usage of open source. Developers often pull in hundreds of open source components. Very often, they are not even aware of that. It's very much integrated in their development environments. They just include one library and all the dependencies will be included in their code automatically, whatever they need. The modern applications, as I said, are around 80 to 90% of open source. Interestingly, since a couple of years, we see a new global regulatory pressure on open source, on software overall. We'll have some detailed slides going in depth into that. So in Europe, there's the Cyber Resilience Act, there's an executive order in the US, and all of these regulatory matters, they have one goal. They want to ensure cybersecurity. And very often the security of a product, if it's a proprietary product from a company, that is very well taken care of. And also all the users and customers are informed regularly when there is an update or a fix for any of the security issues. However, with open source, it's more difficult. So everybody can grab whatever he finds somewhere on the internet, but then he also has the responsibility to look out if there are some security vulnerabilities, new security vulnerabilities which may pop up, and that he needs to manage by himself. A very interesting new subject is AI-generated code. AI is generated a lot. We have some statistics that 80% of the developers are now using AI to develop the code. And 30% of the companies say already that they create code by AI. Now, AI is trained mainly on open source repositories like GitHub. And very often there may be code that is just repeated or duplicated one by one from the open source repositories that the large language model was trained on. And I will have some very nice examples with that later on in the presentation. And even for that AI-generated code, there may be security vulnerabilities, there may be compliance issues, and that needs to be taken care of. And with AI, it's also more and more difficult for the developers to even see that there is open source included. Then we see a big shift from a developer concern to executive responsibilities. So 25 years ago, when I also started with the software development, and we used open source, no of the executive people, no one would ever take any concern about open source. They would just look at the product or that was produced at the end, and they would not care about if we use open source or not. But that has changed a lot. So when in the beginning, when the developer was using open source, he mainly cared about the functionality and was less interested in security vulnerabilities or in any of the security issues that may be in there. Today, we see that even executive people, CISOs, security responsibilities, or even legal teams look into the usage of open source because there can be a very high impact to reputation or to the commercial risks. So it's now very important that open source is managed very well. The SBOM, that is the software bill of material, basically the ingredients that you put into a software system, they are becoming table stakes. So especially in B2B, you cannot sell software anymore without knowing in detail what kind of open source components you have in your software. Your customers will ask for it, and it's state of the art that you can deliver an SBOM. We see that especially in the automotive industry, where there is a very high concern, especially for security vulnerabilities, and each of the suppliers has to deliver a very detailed SBOM. We also see more and more sophisticated security threats. If we look at some issues or some incidents that have happened, like the XZ security, where hackers directly attack open source, or they try to modify it to put in some backdoors to be able to easier to get into systems once the open source component has been installed on a customer side. That is very dangerous, and we see that coming more and more. So it's important that this is taken care of thoroughly We have a high pressure on the development teams that new software needs to be delivered faster and faster. So that means if there are any security issues, there's less and less time to thoroughly analyze the code. It needs to be very quick. And for that, again, you need to have a very well thought through management of your open source components. And I briefly mentioned that already. The reputational and commercial risk is very high. Nobody wants to be in the news just because he did not manage open source correctly. We had this some years ago with the Equifax incidents, which you may remember, where a large reputed company did not manage open source well, and they had a big incident where millions of data sets were stolen. So we see right now there are many areas that have a high impact on the usage of open source, and that's why it matters more and more today that it is managed very well. When we look at compliance and security, so starting from the very beginning, when we look at how a developer creates a product, an experienced developer will not start from scratch. So he will start his development based on some firm's code base that is there already. There may be some commercial components that he has included. Then there will be lots and lots of open source components. An experienced developer will know where he can get these resources and just integrate in. That makes him very fast, very efficient, and he gets high quality software, which he can write in a very short time. And then, of course, there's his own code, which will glue everything together to get to this end product. So the usage of open source is very good. It's state of the art. It's done everywhere. You cannot write any software anymore without using open source. However, there are some risks that you need to be aware of and that need to be managed. And at the very top, there are these security vulnerabilities. So if you have some code, some commercial product, whenever there is a security vulnerability detected, the vendor will inform you automatically. You know that from like big operating systems or large commercial systems that you're using, that you are asked to install updates, or you will get a notification that there is a new update which will fix security vulnerabilities. For open source, most of the time this is very different. Nobody knows who's using the open source component. You can freely download it anywhere in the internet. So you integrate it in your component. Nobody is aware that you're using it, so you cannot be automatically informed. On the other hand, open source contains security vulnerabilities as any software, and they are quite often detected, and the communities normally react very fast to provide fixes and patches. They will be published in databases or on the project websites. And you, as a user of open source, have the responsibility to pick up the patch and get it installed. So first one, security vulnerabilities is one of the risks of open source. And you need to set up a process within your company to make sure that you are aware of which components you have. And then check every day if there are new security vulnerabilities. And if yes, get the patch, install it, and provide it to your customer. A second risk of open source is the compliance. Open source belongs to the person who has created, to the author, to the copyright holder. And you need permission from the author on how you can use it. And very often the author will put a license next to the code, which says, do whatever you want, or you can do whatever you want, but please mention my name. Or it could be, you can do whatever you want, but I have given this code for you for free as open source. I want you that whatever you create out of that open source, the new product that you have, that must be open source as well. And then it's getting more complicated because sometimes companies don't want to do that. So they just they do not want to open source their code again. So it's very important that you clearly check what kind of obligations does the code that you use have, and does it match to your business model? Most of the open source may, some of the open source may not, and then you cannot take these components. But it needs to be managed. Again, you need to have some kind of process to check what is coming in your software, what are the obligations, and can you fulfill all the obligations. Then a very interesting risk is the AI-generated code. So the AI generators, they produce lots of code very easily. It's very easy for users to get code generated by AI. And the code often has reasonable quality. And that's why it's also used that often in the industry. So what we can see, or what you need to know, the AI machine is not generating this code out of the nowhere. It has been trained somehow. And typically some big open source repositories like GitHub have been used to train the AI that it can now produce code. So if it was used to train the AI, or if open source has been used to train the AI, then of course it can happen that the AI produces code that looks exactly like the source that it was trained on, and I will have some examples of that. So we're going to talk about these risks a little bit on the following slides. Usage of open source is good. It's used everywhere. There are some risks that you need to manage. And I just hear that Venkat has now joined as well. So welcome, Venkat, to the webinar.
Thanks, Andreas. Can you do it? Can you quickly tell me if you can hear me okay?
Yeah, everything is okay.
All right. Thanks a lot, Andreas, and apologies for the fiasco with the connection. And thanks a lot for all of our viewers who have joined in today. And moving on to our next item, which we wanted to discuss today, is on regulations and their importance in how open source can actually be used with all the kind of due diligence that can be used in enterprises, right? So now there is one thing which we keep saying is open source doesn't mean it is free software. So open source comes with regulations. At the same time, we also wanted to ensure that in either both all the solutions that we produce, okay, or our customers are equipped with everything that helps them ensure that the regulations are all intact. So moving on to what is running around the world, okay, as far as regulations are concerned. And if you think about it, one of the biggest driver of regulations across the world has been the initiator of regulations across the world has been the United States Executive Order. But then, the European Union Cyber Resilience Act has several key aspects that are a little more concerning or disturbing, or I would call them more than disturbing, disruptive in this space, right? So this is this slide particularly talks about the highlights of the European Union Cyber Resilience Act. Okay? The Cyber Resilience Act, the two highlights are the cyber security is taken into account in planning and every phase, and not just during the maintenance and delivery of the project. And there has been a lot of back and forth before people arrived at, which is manufacturers will have to be we have to actively exploited vulnerabilities and incidents. The SLAs and timelines of this particular mandate will actually come into effect when the law, which I think hopefully goes into effect in 2027. Okay, we'll have all the details. And there's also clear and understandable instructions for the use of products with digital elements. So that's something that interests me. Is there's a particular definition of products with digital elements. It could be a jar file with an encryption, or it could just be a device as well, which has some encryption in it. And all cybersecurity risks have to be documented, and this protects primarily the investors who are backing the business, because they would be liable to disclose what kind of risk they actually encounter. And once sold, manufacturers must ensure that the respected product lifetime for a period of 5 years, vulnerabilities are handled effectively. And the fact that the vulnerabilities really have to be handled effectively depends on the kind of tooling you have, the kind of processes you have in place. And the last one we wanted to highlight today was security updates of every delivered software needs to be available for at least 5 years. This, I think, in my opinion, is a little disruptive because we have to, different vendors would have, different end of life policies, different extended support policies and whatnot. So the mandate of having security updates to be made available for at least 5 years, I think, this will take a little getting used to for, the software vendors. So a quick slide on what CRA actually means for suppliers and maintenance. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but some of the highlights here are puts a lot of mandate on the vendors to report actually exploited vulnerabilities within 24 hours. So this is a significant shift. We also given annotations to the original document. So this is a significant shift compared to some of the Western mandates or the United States executive order mandates where there is it's a lot more time to actually disclose a particular vulnerability. And there is one thing that we really like is the requisition to provide SBOMs and maintain component transparency. And for OSS maintenance, this is like the original proposal had actually been not received well because it said that the OSS projects are not exempt from CRA obligations, right? Meaning, if I'm a casual OSS open source developer and I have a project with me, I'm actually liable for the software that I produce. But that would not probably go well, and it has undergone some changes. And now non-commercial OSS projects are exempt, from CRA obligations. And maintenance continue to support commercial deployments, or may be subject to compliance. Right? So some of these, when we're not getting into details, feel free to reach out to us on any questions on these. But there's a healthy balance between the responsibilities for suppliers and maintenance in the Cyber Resilience Act. And we talk about the CRA, but the regulations are across the world. So we talk about CRA, NIS2, and NIS2 and DORA are complementing cybersecurity regulations that are in force in the European Union region. And then we have the positional, want to call it OG, which is US Executive Order 14.28 and Secure Development Framework as well. And India, one of the largest software producers in the APAC region, they have started introducing some mandates coming in from the regulatory authority called CERT. And we are now in the version 2 of the SBOM guidelines of it CERT has produced. So all in all, we have greater accountability for software providers so that enterprises are not left in a dilemma whenever they run into a cybersecurity attack. All right, so I'll start with a little commentary on the rise of AI-generated code and let Andrea chip in. So with the kind of innovations that are happening across the world, with which is originated by OpenAI, AI-generated code has become a real norm for software vendors to produce code. So this has significantly increased velocity of developers trying to write down code. But let me hand off to Andreas to talk about what kind of risks we're actually seeing in AI-generated code.
Yeah, so we have seen that AI is everywhere in the code generation. And I just would like to add to Venkat that there are several reasons why we see it everywhere. And one of the reasons is that it makes you very efficient. So with the, if we look at AI, it's reported that the teams using AI, they are 2 to 10 times faster. That's not only by generating code, but also by getting test cases, getting the documentation done. So lots of the development process is made very easy with AI. What we also see is because of the talent shortage, many development teams do not have enough resources to write the code in a traditional way, so they will just add AI to be more efficient. There's also a very low barrier to the entry to AI usage and code generation. It's very easy. You just type and the AI system will help you. So there's not a deep learning curve. You can just get started with that. So there's a very high cost reduction when you are more efficient. And AI is very much integrated in the development flow right now. So in all the big IDEs, you will find AI integrated, and it will just help you right away. So if we look, I have for very one a nice example here. This is a Copilot example. So you just start typing, and the developer, so he wants to get a matrix transpose. So it doesn't matter what he wants to do here. I just want to show you that as soon as the developer has typed these 2 lines of code, the system will answer and give him the code automatically that he needs to do all of that. And you will see there are even comments, and this is quite complicated code. So we have briefly talked why AI is able to do that, and the reason was because it has been trained on open source. So if it is like that, then maybe we are able to find the origin of this code somewhere in the internet. So we did search, and we actually found something which is absolutely identical in GitHub, and you can compare line by line, but there's a small difference, and I just give you some time to look at it in detail to find out where do you see the big difference between the AI generated code and the original. And of course, it's very obvious. You will have managed to see it's the first 3 lines here. So it is the author, the copyright holder, and the license that is with that part of the open source code. So the large language model, the AI, has learned everything, but not who the owner is. And that is dangerous if you want to be compliant. You would need to find the origin of the code that you get. And for developers, it's very often difficult to see where the code comes from. I even have another example, which is my most favorite. You may remember the game Quake 3, which was written 25 years ago. And it had a very innovative algorithm to calculate the inverse square root. So as soon as you type this into your AI, there will be a very sophisticated algorithm, which is very specific because it uses some hard-coded values, some magic numbers, and some very specific bit shifting that gives you a good approximation to calculate the square root quite well. And this calculation is very often needed for the 3D presentation, 3D graphics. So you still find it in many computer games when you need a very fast calculation. And what is very interesting here, you will find that here the AI has also given you an author and a license. And the license is some BSD2, and there is an author on top. And again, we were looking for the originator or the origin of this from Quake 3. And you can see the algorithm that you can find on GitHub is exactly the same, with exactly the same magic numbers. However, it's a different license. So the original code was published under GPL, which is a very restrictive license. So the AI has come up with a hallucination, and it knows there should be something like a copyright holder and some license, but it's all fake. So there's no place in the internet where we could find this left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, that would have been the original that we would have expected. And again, that makes it very difficult for to manage open source when you get wrong information. You will need some tooling or some measure to manage your open source correctly. And for that, there are many tools and tool chains. And Venkat will explain a little bit about that. Venkat, are you still there?
Yes, Andy. Yeah, I was talking about how modern OSS risks actually look like. Because the invention, or I wouldn't call it invention, but the disruption that's caused by generative AI tools, give a lot of liberty to developers who want to churn out code faster than ever. Okay, while there are enterprise or corporate guidelines in place to ensure that there is less of a hallucination, less of an agentic development, or responsible if you may. So still, there is a lot of risk that agentic development actually brings into software development. So not too much AI generated vibe code, okay, with again AI reviewed code. So this is like a robo is writing code and another robo is actually reviewing the same code, right? So this has to be taken with a pinch of salt, okay, in our experience to see how we can reduce the risks from AI generated code which is reviewed by another AI tool itself, right? And the second one is lack of ownership on source fragments, which are copied from internet. So while AI brings in certain problems, okay, we still have conventional problems in our experience where there is copy pasted code coming in from either Stack Overflow or a GitHub, very popular GitHub project, and there is zero lack of ownership because there is a lot of AI in place here, and lack of visibility into compliance risks for copyless software. Okay, could just include binaries directly or libraries directly into the code, and which will lead into compliance risks coming in from those inclusions. And unfortunately, this with the kind of AI generated code that comes in, okay, so snippet detection has gone to the next level now, right? Now I'll take one example, going back to what Andreas was talking about in a couple of slides, where we saw some of the code fragments that look exactly similar, right? Now AI generated code, unfortunately, doesn't fall into the paradigm, and I mean, it does fall into the paradigm, but it takes it into slightly complicated use cases. Like for example, if you have a code block that has a variable defined as X, the AI generated code, okay, would definitely not call the same variable. So this is something that we call as semantic AI generated code, and which is very difficult using conventional tools because that does snippet level detection. But how do we actually try to resolve some of these risks, right? So what we really recommend is ensure that the code that is produced to your customers goes through a proper audit cycle, either internally or enrolling external vendors. Now, ensure that your dev teams, especially using the AI code generation tools, are trained on what we want to call as responsible AI, and you have enough practices in place to strengthen the SBOM generation and the documentation practices, which also include some kind of a training practices for your team on how they can use the AI generated tools as responsibly. And at the same time, the last one is prepare for a fragmented regulatory environment, right? So ensure that you are adhering to one regulation by one regulation, because there is a lot of regulations in play, and you would have different kinds of reports, although generating the same, following the same standard, which is Section PDX or Section DX. Different regulations have different mandates, and so use the power of custom fields available in each of these standards to adhere to the regulations that come in with the respective authority. So, and we talked about how we can we really need to ensure that some of the OSS code has critical OSS code or critical code that we generate has to actually go through the proper audit cycle. So I will actually hand off to Andreas to introduce what they do at BigC and how they can help our users to get around all of these open tools that face in the modern world.
Okay, so there should be a small animation, but it seems it's not coming up. Basically, BITSI has been around since 15, 16 years, and we have been doing open source auditing since 2012. This is when we started. And we're now very proud that we also just started with our own subsidiary in the US. And there we now offer all the same services that we have here in Germany. So it's all about around open source management. And as a partner of OpenChain, we offer a preparation for certifications or consultancy about the management of open source, about the tool chains that you should be setting up. We help our customers in setting up the tool chains. And then, of course, we run the audits to produce the SBOMs. This is which will then directly go to your legal team that we can have. And for that, we use our strong partnership with Revenera. So the former Revenera auditing team will now deliver also the same services as before, plus the additional services that we had developed at BITSI. And from Revenera side, Revenera will continue to work on the scanning agents, on the SCA, software composition analysis tools, and to innovate even further on those.
Thanks, Andrea. So I think this shift in focus, we wouldn't really call this a major change from what we have. Is BITSI has been a really good partner for Revenera for a really long time, and the way we have now structured gives us more focus on innovation, which any SCA vendor should actually be focusing on, right? So more focused on innovation and gives us enough time to focus on SBOM creation and management, which is like the bread and butter of any SCA tool. We want to improve our accuracy in creation, expand our ecosystems. And not just creation of an SBOM, but also ingestion of SBOMs coming in from your vendors. And at the same time, one of the key aspects or one of the key outcome of an SBOM and SCA program is vulnerability management. So we wanted to ensure that we have enough functionality, enough capabilities in the solution that can help you prioritize, suppress, and manage security vulnerabilities at scale in your OSS program. And, as much as we want to say this, we are continuing to be an on-prem solution because, we still hear a lot of our, users and customers, are not having the desire to ship code, into a Revenera data center. So we continue to be an on-prem solution. And, what on-prem means is that, lack of features with respect to elasticity. So we want to ensure that the system is scalable, the system is resilient enough to improve the scan speed, flexibility, and enable our users to scan at scale. So with that, we can take any questions that are available, or Andreas, if you want to add any closing comments.
Yeah, so this brings us to the end of the presentations. Just to summarize, so open source is now everywhere. You cannot build any applications without open source. We see a big rise of AI, and the amount of open source is so big that you cannot manage it manually anymore. So you need some kind of automation and tool chain that does that for you. And I think that was the very short summary of the call today. So open source is there. It's good. There are some risks, and there are ways how you can manage it. Now we are open to questions.
Okay, so let me read out one question to you, Andreas, and maybe I'll do the moderation part here. So there's a question from Paul. The question goes like, how should organizations evaluate the trustworthiness and sustainability of open source projects before adoption?
So very good question, and it is exactly the right direction before you use open source. you should look into the risks that are associated with one of the components. So what some of our customers do is whenever the development teams want to use a new component or they need some new features, they will look up some components. And before they are allowed to integrate it, there will be a check. What is the license? Are there any compliance restrictions? What are the obligations to use it? Are there any risks? And that depends on the model, what you're going to do with this component. Is it software as a service? Will it be delivered in a product? Or will it just be used for testing? Or are there any security vulnerabilities associated with that component? And all of that can be evaluated beforehand. And if that check turns out that everything is okay, then it can be used. And if not, then it needs to be checked if there are any measures how you can remediate the risks, or you just need to look for another component. So I think it's a very important step to do that beforehand, and that you have some kind of process in place that allows the usage of open source, but does all these checks right away before you integrate it, because once you have integrated a component, it's much more difficult to replace it later on, or much more expensive.
Thank you. Thank you, Anil. So let me take one question. So there is one question on, what's one small step the company could take tomorrow to get ahead of these, upcoming regulations. So I really want to say, set up an open source program of it, but then it is not a small step. So what we would start with, is education. So education on both use of open source code and also understanding the risks, coming from open source code. And, education not with respect to, the licensing or, compliance, but, the need to actually understand, why developers or, people who are shipping code, release engineers, release managers, should actually understand, why they should actually care for, open source compliance risks. And if you really have, the appetite for it, I think we should definitely go ahead and start looking at setting up a proper, open source program offerings, where, your code goes through a proper gateway before it is actually released to customers, which do not lead you into, getting into legal risks. Okay, so there's a question on Bitsy as well. And let me read this out to you, Andreas, maybe you can take this. So for folks who, may not be familiar, can you share a bit about, the kind of services that, Bitsy provides, to manage, the OSS challenges, especially on the regulations part?
Okay, sure. So we help customers with everything around the management of open source. That can be a simple an audit, an in-depth audit. We can detect the snippets that can be used, for example, in M&A or in continuous audits during development, where we just check day by day or week by week, is there any new open source component that is risky? And we will report with an SBOM on the compliance, on the security vulnerabilities. There may also be export restrictions. There may be this AI-generated code. It can also be the sustainability of a component. Is it an old component or a component that is still maintained well? If there's a big community that is maintaining the component. So that's one part, creating the SBOMs. We help our customers with understanding their open source or open source usage. Or we have training courses that make developers aware, developers, managers, team leads, that make them aware what are the risks in open source and how can you manage those. As an open chain member, we help with the certification for security or for compliance, ISO 5230. We help integrating. We do a gap analysis with customers to see what do they need to do to have a good management of the open source compliance. And of course, with all the new regulations that are around, like in Europe, we have the Cyber Resilience Act. There's DORA. There is also NIS2, and in all the companies selling to Europe will need to follow those. In the US, we have the executive order. We help creating the SBOMs, checking for the open source components, and helping with identifying all the security vulnerabilities. Actually, there's also one nice project that we are currently running for the European government. We formed a consortium where we, with some of our partners, develop a product pipeline which will help fulfilling all the obligations that you have for the Cyber Resilience Act. So if you are selling products to Europe, that may be helpful to you as well. There's many more services. You can find them
there's a couple more
to the website. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks for the insights on what basically does and how we can help organizations. So there's a security question here, so which I'll quickly take this. How can organizations create a security culture that addresses open source risk? Okay, at all stages of PMT, from developer choice to production monitoring. So so this is a good question, excellent question that we keep getting. One question I'll ask, I'll repeat my answer the same, repeat my previous answer, which is education. To begin with, right? The first question, unfortunately, will begin with education on why people should care for risks or security vulnerabilities coming in from open source. And it is very easy to scare people on the risks that come from vulnerabilities from open source code. There are very known popular examples you can talk about. There is a Heartbleed, there is a Log4Shell and whatnot. And these were like ubiquitous components. So OpenSSL and Log4j were there everywhere. So this should be a good enough starting point for people to understand why it is important. Now, how do we get this culture? Okay, is by, I would say, depends on the appetite of the organization. So if you want to be self-sufficient, we would say start by investing in a TA practice. So I keep calling this as a practice and not just like a tool set, because it is really a practice. Tooling, is something that comes as an outcome of the practice. So once you have invested in a TA practice, the developers will be obligated to start looking at, hey, is this component that I'm introducing into my code risk-free or not? The risk might come in from license compliance, or the risk might come in from a security vulnerability. Now, there is multiple phases where you want to educate your team to say, hey, where do we want to set up the security practice of the risk coming in from open source components? At the developer side, do I want an IDE plugin which tells me, hey, show me vulnerabilities of all the open source components that I'm looking at? Or do you want to put it at, after my build process is done, I'd want to understand what are the vulnerabilities. Now, the catch with security practices is that it doesn't stop or it doesn't start at, the induction of the OSS code. I would have taken a library which is probably in its 7th generation, and when I introduced the library into my code, it was vulnerability free. However, while during development or even after the product has been shipped, okay, like a couple months after the product has been shipped, then you would be then there is probably a new vulnerability coming into that library. So what you really want is invest in a TA practice, which also includes a tool that sends you alerts, or notifies you of new vulnerabilities that you have shipped into a product that you have shipped to your customers like a year ago, 2 years ago. But still, rather than listening in from your customers who are complaining that, hey, there is a critical vulnerability in your application, okay, you can be proactive about it and say, hey, we're aware of this and we're working on it, or we're aware of this and rest assured it doesn't impact you because it happens in a particular configuration only, right? And some of the here's a good segue into talking about VEX as well, the Vulnerability Exploitability Exchange as a standard in Cyclone DX, which allows you to express why some of the vulnerabilities should matter to your customers, and why some of the vulnerabilities can be ignored by your customers as well. I know that's a long answer, but I think everything starts with the first step. The first step would, I would still say is education. There's a question from Jeff. What are the current capabilities of coding side tools for scanning open models and data sets? A good question, Jeff. We're currently exploring how we can, identify the use of, Hugging Face models, which is, apparently a very big marketplace and a very large, set of, models that are available for developers to consume. So we're trying to explore, how coding side can detect Hugging Face models introduced into the code. And if you have any other, models in mind or marketplaces in mind, where we should be focusing on, feel free to reach out to us or let us know, and we're happy to work with you on how we can add to support as well. All right, I think maybe we'll take one last question that's come in. Andreas would like to take this. Let me read this out to you. So, in the beginning, I think we talked about several big risks around open source. So, are there any emerging risks, as we keep setting up more practices? Do you see any emerging risks, that we should keep an eye on?
So I think, unfortunately, the lists the risks we talked about today are not complete. So we focused on the very high-level risks that you should address. There are also some others which I just briefly mentioned, like the export control or the maturity of open source components or the age of open source components, where you could also look at. However, the ones that we wanted to focus on today was security vulnerabilities and the compliance and the AI-generated code, which are especially AI, which is a relatively new risk, which needs to be managed in a different way.
Thanks, Andy.
All right. Thank you so much, team, for that wonderful presentation. And well, folks, that's all the time we have for today. If we didn't get to your question, or if you still have one, please type it into the console now, and we'll make sure it gets over to the Rivenera team. A big thank you to all of you guys for joining us. And of course, a special thanks to Rivenera for sponsoring today's event presented by ADT Mag and Visual Studio Mag. Thanks again for being with us, and we wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.